Hello, and welcome to another episode of Professional Book Girl. My name is Kayla, and I read a ton of books that I recommend the best to you. And it is a big episode for that because it is our May wrap up. Part of me can't believe May's already over. On the other hand, May felt like a very long month for me. Like when I sit down to do these wrap up episodes, I like to think about like my month as a whole. What did I do? Things I can talk to you guys about. And I forgot so much that happened in May. Like the first 3 weekends in May, I was home, which is not really crazy considering I'm about to like be home on Long Island for like the whole summer. But I like just forgot I was going back and forth so much. I had a really great month. We're gonna talk about that. I'm going to review 22 books on this episode. Really quickly, first, our June book club pick is Darling Girls by Sally Hepworth. I'm very excited to read it. The episode will air on June 27th. Please get your thoughts to me by June 25th. If you would like for them to be included in the episode, you can record a voice note and email it to me at professionalbookgirlpod@gmail.com, or type out your thoughts and DM them to me at professionalbookgirl or kredwatt on Instagram, or email them to me. Whatever you want to do. Let's talk about May. So I think when on my April wrap up, I was like, I also don't like May. I just like don't like spring. We get that now. Like it's in my book because it's been Memorial Day weekend, it is officially summer, and I am just like so happy that it is summer. Like already just feel like summer Kayla is back. I feel like her. I'm just like I'm good, right? But I actually did have a really good month. So, like I mentioned, I went home the first 3 weekends in May, right? Why am I now questioning that? I'm literally pulling up my calendar to fact check myself. The first weekend in May, though, I know I was home. No, I was home the first 2 weekends in May, and then I had one off in the city. But I went home for a family event, and then my younger cousin and I, Kristen, who I feel like I do talk a lot about on this show, we went to see The Fall Guy, which so good. Highly recommend seeing that with Ryan Gosling. See it in theaters if you can. And then the next time I was home was for Mother's Day, and my siblings and I took my mom out to a really nice lunch, and then it's right by the mall. So then me and my mom and my sister went shopping, and I just always love doing that. And then the following weekend, my mom came to the city, and this was like such a great day. I took her for Mother's Day to this Chinese head spa that I found. Look them up on TikTok if you're not familiar. I highly recommend. This is not sponsored, but I found this place, La Beauty, in Manhattan. It is $120 for your first time. After that, it's $150, which might sound like a lot of money, but it is so cheap for everything that they do. For a 1 hour treatment, you get a full scalp massage. Like my head has never felt like that before. Upper body massage and facial. And it was just like insane, like so amazing. And then after that, we walked through Central Park up to the Met, and we went to see the Sleeping Beauties exhibit, which I loved so much. But they basically, how it works for these big exhibits at the Met, they'll put you on a virtual queue, which they used to not do. So it's very nice that they do that now. And then you can just like walk around the museum until they text you that it's your time. So we were on the virtual queue for 3 hours. So we had time to walk through the museum. And my mom has only ever been to the Met once, when she took me when I was like going into 11th grade, I think, to see the Alexander McQueen exhibit. But even then, I didn't know the Met well. And it honestly might have been my first time there. Oh, no, I went for like a field trip. But because when I was in high school, I took classes at FIT, which is where I went to college, ended up going to college, and they took us to the Met for that. But anyway, it was really special this time because I know the museum so well and I love it there. So I would like show her my favorite pieces. And then like my mom is not a fashion person, but she also loved the exhibit. And then my sister met us uptown and we all got dinner together, and it was just like really lovely. This is why I love the summertime, and like this May was kind of like the transition into summer because I spend so much time with my family, and that for me is like alone time recharges me, but like spending time with my family does as well. I feel like it kind of reminds me of like who I am, which probably does sound insane, but yeah. And then I was home for Memorial Day weekend, and luckily we had a great weather Memorial Day weekend. Although last year's Memorial Day weekend was the best one ever because that is when I went to the Eras Tour in New York. But even that weekend, it was kind of chilly. Like during the concert, it was perfect because like I remember like me and my sister after were like, oh, we didn't sweat, and we were like jumping up and down acting like we were possessed during a Reputation set, and I didn't break a sweat, which does a lot for me because I am a sweaty girl. But because it was like cool out, and the year before that the weather was horrible Memorial Day weekend. So I was like not getting my hopes up because my mom's pool opens Memorial Day weekend. But luckily, the weather was so nice. So I went to the pool, and then my best friend from growing up doesn't live on Long Island anymore, just like I don't, but she lives upstate. So she was home visiting her family for the weekend. And I got together with her and we went to the beach, which was very exciting. I didn't expect to do that yet. We went for some Long Island geography for you guys. So Long Island is an island that is long, but it's not very like north to west is pretty short. Like you can drive from like the North Shore to the South Shore in like maybe a half hour. Don't quote me, but like meanwhile driving east to west is like hours and hours long. Like when people go from Manhattan to Montauk, that is a very long car ride. Like on Summer House, and they're talking about their fights from Montauk to the city. That is like 4 hours, like with on a good day. Um, but from like north to south, not even an hour. So I'm from the South Shore, and there's a Billy Joel line, cool girl from the South Shore or rich girl from the North Shore. I am from the South Shore, so take from that what you will. But when you go to the beaches on the South Shore, for the most part, you're on the Atlantic Ocean. Some of it is like the Great South Bay, because Fire Island is like the Long Island barrier island. So when you're between Fire Island and Long Island, then it is the Bay. But once you go out like a little bit further east, which is where like the Hamptons, Montauk, everything is, that is the Atlantic Ocean. But the North Shore, it's the Long Island Sound, which is like the body of water between Long Island and Connecticut. Who knew you were going to get a geography lesson there? And that water is pretty flat. And I just prefer the ocean. But we went to a North Shore beach, which I also like. I went to those beaches a lot growing up with my grandparents, actually, because my pop would go to fish and my grandma would sit there and read, and then like we would just play on the beach. And a lot of those beaches up there are very rocky. It's not really sand, so that's why I usually just don't prefer North Shore beaches anyway. Also, because like I live on the South Shore. But this beach we went to wasn't rocky. It was like a private beach. It was really beautiful and peaceful. I went on a kayak, which I was just editing the Funny Story Book Club one night, and I talked about them going on a kayak. I was like, not for me. And I listened to that and was like, LOL, because I went on a kayak and I didn't fall into the water. So that was great. But it was a really lovely weekend. And then the next day I was back at the pool, and I just like, it felt like the beginning of summer. So a little bit of my summer schedule, I guess, because this I will kind of impact you guys really just like from where I'll be. But the month of June, I am like back and forth between the city and Long Island, kind of mostly on Long Island. But I will be in the city like for a few days each week during the work week. And when I'm doing that, I'm like slowly bringing like my summer clothes home and a ton of books home, because July and August I will just fully be on Long Island, which I'm very excited for. I also, though, this month went to a bunch of book events, particularly the Dial of the Lights book event. I had so much fun. It was at the Rip Bodice, so it was like it was crowded in the event, but it was like cool to be there for something private, and the authors there were amazing. And I had gone the day I finished reading Done and Dusted by Lila Sage, and she was there, so that was just like very cool. And it was really fun to see familiar faces and book friends. And then I've been really busy party planning. I told you guys on previous episodes I'm having a Mamma Mia themed 30th birthday party for my 30th birthday on July 27th, save the date. And this month it got really real. My invites are out, like cake is commissioned, booked the DJ. I got my dress. That's like the most important thing. So I'm getting so excited for that. I had this literally on New Year's Day is when the idea came about. Like my dad mentioned that I could throw a big party in his backyard, and I'm literally acting like it's my wedding, and my parents are as well. But um it's been in my mind for 5 months, 5 full months now. So now that it's like actually getting real, it's just really exciting. And like in June, I want to have most of it planned before July, because my brother's wedding is in July, and there's just going to be a lot going on with that. So I'm excited. I've been party planning. I booked my trip to Paris. So I've been like not planning that, but just like starting to save ideas. And then the last thing is that I've gotten into a good morning routine, which like some of you listening are probably like, whatever, who cares? But since I work fully remote, I was working from bed a lot. And at first I was justifying it because I was like, because I can, but I just was not feeling great. I was always so tired, like it was just not good. And I've been getting out of bed by like 9:30 the latest every day. And it it's unfortunate when they say that doing that makes you feel better. And I usually will like do my workouts later in the day, but the last few days I've been doing it right when I get up, and like I feel great. I hate to report back that getting up early and moving my body makes me feel great. But on top of all of that, oh wait, also I want to say what I've been listening to pretty much just tortured poets because I had to learn 31 songs worth of lyrics. I feel like I know them pretty well now. And actually it was really fun going home because I love car music and like listening to an album for the first time in a car. And I actually haven't made it through the full album in the car yet, but since I've been going home, I've been able to listen to it while driving around. And that's like I feel like that's when you really get like a vibe of an album. Like, is this a good car driving album? So I've been listening to Torture Poets, obviously. I'm not going to go through my Bravo shows again, but you know what I'm watching on Bravo if you listen to last week's episode. Although last night, from the time I'm recording this, was the Summer House finale. And like, oh my fucking God, if Carl asked me to hug him like that, I would have ended the engagement on the spot. But anyway, I also am almost done with my Gossip Girl rewatch. I'm actually probably going to finish it today, the day that I'm recording this. I have been watching it like nonstop in May. It was a slow rewatch for me, but then I'm like weirdly enjoying it more this time around as an adult. And I'm realizing that so many of the references, and I don't even mean sexual things, because actually in the later seasons it's like not as sexy as the early seasons, but like cultural references and like history references and things like that, like they just went over my head back in the day, and like now I'm just like really loving it, and I'm already like, oh, when am I going to watch it again? So that's what I've been watching, listening to. Now it's time to talk about what I've been reading. We have 22 book reviews. Let's get into it. Okay, actually, this is a great segue because when I was with my best friend from growing up, Megan, over Memorial Day weekend, she was like, wait, what was this book you talked about? And she was describing Midnight is the Darkest Hour. And she was like, sometimes I'll listen when I'm driving and I can't write the title down. And I was like, well, you could always text me. And that made me think like you guys could always DM me, obviously, but also like the episode posts show the book title. So I'm about to talk about 22 books, which is a lot. So get your pen and pepper ready. Get your pen and paper ready. Get your notes app out, get your typewriter, or you can go to the Instagram post where there'll be a giant stock with all of these books to refresh your memory after. So the first book is All the Summers in Between by Brooke Lee Foster. I read her last book on Gin Lane last summer, or maybe 2 summers ago, but when it came out, and I loved it so much. So I was very excited for this one. And actually at the event I did at the author interview that I did at Barnes & Noble, Brooke was in the audience and we got to meet, which was really cool. And I had just started her book actually the night before, which was just like serendipitous. And this is a historical fiction that takes place in the 60s and 70s on Long Island out east. So it's very interesting reading about this from the perspective of a Long Islander, and Brooke is from the east end of Long Island, so everything and the references were all like spot on. It is on Long Island, by the way, not in Long Island, and whenever an author gets it right, I'm always like, okay, point for you. This is about 2 friends who Thea is our narrator for the whole book, and she is a Long Island local, and then her best friend, I want to say her name was Margot, I don't remember her name, she is a summer person out on Long Island, and they meet in the 60s and kind of at this age when they just both really need a friend. And even though their lives and the worlds they come from are so different, they really just like bond together. And eventually a traumatic event happens that really reinforces that bond, but ultimately is what breaks them up, because Margot, the rich girl, leaves and she does not come back for like 10 years. So the book opens in the 70s. Thea is married and has a young child. It actually opens up on her 30th birthday, which was just like weird to read because I'm like, my whole personality right now is that I'm about to turn 30. So, and there's like a lot with that I found very interesting, but Margot is suddenly back in her life. And then we see kind of as these mysteries in both timelines converge, but it's really a book about friendship and the power of friendships, specifically these friendships that you form at this young age and how those bonds always stay with you. There's really great, because it's the 60s and 70s, like the music references are so much fun. I really love this book. I gave it 4 stars, and surprise, I got to interview Brooke about it, and you will be able to listen to that interview on Thursday. Next book that I read is How to End a Love Story by Yulin Kwong. I actually can't believe I haven't spoken about this on the podcast. I don't know why I didn't do that yet, but we're going to do it right now. So, this one was getting so much hype on the internet, and you should believe the hype. So, our main girl is Helen, and she is the author of, actually, now that I'm talking about it, I'm like, wait, did I cover this on an episode? And I'm second guessing myself. I like have amnesia. I'm on my Instagram feed right now looking at this post. No, I didn't. Okay. Anyway, our main girl is Helen, and she is the author of a YA book series that honestly gave me private vibes. So, I'm already hooked. And the books have been bought, and they're being turned into a TV show. And part of her contract was that she would get to be a screenwriter on it, and she's in the writer's room. So she moves from New York to LA to do that. And when she gets there on the first day, one of the screenwriters walks in, and it is Grant Shepard, who she has not seen in 13 years, and she hates him. And I'm not going to say why, which is going to make the rest of the book really hard to talk about, but they are bonded together because of something absolutely tragic and insane that happened when they were in high school, because they went to high school together, and she has not seen him since. And she is now suddenly so thrown off that he is working on her show. Like, these books are her babies, and he is like a big presence in the writer's room, and he's very talented, and you get the perspectives of both of them, which I love in a romance. You can guess what happens. It's an enemies to lovers romance in a Hollywood setting, which like checks every box for me. This, for both of those tropes though, is done so well. The enemies to lovers, like this is more than just like we bicker because our desks are next to each other, like something like the hating game, which I also love, but they have a legitimate reason for why they start off as enemies, and watching them work through that and overcome that was extremely powerful. And I feel like it made the payoff of their love so much more meaningful because of where they start in the beginning of this book. Then also, being in the screenwriter's room, I really loved this. I loved the inner workings of her, like kind of letting go of her books and watching them evolve into something different, but then at the same time being brought to life. Like, I just thought it was so, so well done. It is spicy. I loved Grant, and like, talk about a new book boyfriend. I just like, it's really hard to say without saying why they hate each other. Oh, fuck. There's an ant. Oh my God. Okay, my room was just infested by ants, and I thought I killed them all, but I just found another one. So, okay, I'm leaving that in. Anyway, now I'm completely thrown off. So now I feel like I just have creepy crawlies everywhere. But anyway, you can, like I said, they fall in love, Hollywood romance. I'm so sorry, I'm so thrown off right now from that. 4 stars. I really loved that book. Next, I read Rich People Problems by Kevin Kwan, which is the 3rd book in the Crazy Rich Asians series. And I loved book 1. Book 2 didn't really do it for me. I liked book 3 more than book 2. It's obviously hard to say anything since it's the 3rd in a series. There are so many characters that, like, I read these over the course of 2 years, which was not smart because it was just hard to keep track of a lot of the side characters. I thought this was the perfect ending to the series, but I was kind of ready for it to end. I gave that 3 stars. Next, I read Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose, and I did not like this book. I gave it 2 stars, which I think was being generous. This is a thriller about a woman who, when her mom dies, she finds these tape recordings that show her parents hiding a body. And her siblings come home, and like everything kind of breaks out from there. Nothing happens in this book. And then when you get to the end, when you find the reveal, it was so obvious. Like, not for me. And I know she wrote The Perfect Marriage, which I always see when I go to Target, and I was tempted to pick it up, and then I just didn't like this book. So no. It has a great cover though. Next, I read One Star Romance by Laura Hankin. I gave this book 5 stars. This is my favorite book of the month, and I'll just tell you a little blurb right now because I'm going to talk about it on a future episode where you'll get the full spiel. But basically, this was inspired by something that happened to Laura. She had to walk down the aisle with a man who gave her book 1 star on Goodreads. So that is what happens. It is a romance about those 2 people, but it's really more of a portrait of your late 20s, early 30s, and how lives change and friendships change as we change and grow and are on different timelines. And I loved it so much, I gave it 5 stars. Next, I read The Berlin Letters by Catherine Ray. I've spoken about her book, The London House, on this podcast, which I also loved. This is her latest release, and I love this book so much. So this is about the Berlin Wall. It's a Cold War historical fiction, but it is like it's a Berlin Wall historical fiction, really. And it's told in two timelines, the 60s and the 80s. In the 80s, our main girl, I think her name was Louisa. She lives in America. She was born in Germany, though. You can guess where we're going with this. And she works for the CIA, which was really fucking cool as like a code breaker. So like rose code vibes with that. And one day her friend is like going on maternity leave and she's trying to get through a bunch of like documents that she's trying to break before her leave. And Louisa says she'll help her out. And they're working on documents from World War II, even though it's like 40 years later. And they kind of explain why. I don't really remember. But so this is a document from World War II. And she sees on all of the letters that there's this like infinity sign in the bottom corner. And she starts freaking out right away because she was raised by her grandparents. The story she always believed is that her parents died in a car accident when they all still lived in Germany. And then they came to America for like a better life. And her grandpa taught her how to do like code breaking and ciphers. And he always signed everything with that infinity sign. So now she's like, who is my grandpa? Like, was he an agent or he was like a contact or something? And she goes home and like her grandpa has passed, but the grandma's still alive. And she rips apart his office and finds a lot of things. So then the second timeline is in the 60s where we follow Harris, who is Louisa's dad. And the book starts the day that the Berlin Wall is erected. And I filmed a video review of this for Kayla, and I said in it, and it is still so true, that I like going into this book, I knew that I just did not know anything about the Berlin Wall, but I realized I knew like literally nothing about it because I never thought about what it was like when it went up, but I just didn't think it was what actually happened, which is one day people woke up and they were trapped behind the Iron Curtain. There was a giant wall up. They could see friends and family across it, except at first, I guess it was just like more of like a fence. And they were stuck and they had no idea. And so in this book, Harris and his wife and the baby Louisa live in East Berlin, which is what ends up being behind the Iron Curtain and controlled by the Soviets. And the territory is controlled by the Soviets in this time, but they were able to just like cross the street and be in like American run Berlin or whatever. So the wife's parents, like Louisa's grandparents who ended up raising her, live in West Berlin. And the Louisa's mom, it's like Louisa's a baby and she's like plans on taking her daughter to meet up with her parents for lunch that day like they always do, and like I think it was like a Sunday, and she can't get there. And in a moment of panic, she kind of like realizes what's happening and she takes the baby Louisa and throws her over the wall. And that is how Louisa came to live with her grandparents in West Berlin and then immigrate to America. So the 60s timeline is from her dad's point of view, Harris, who was working as a journalist. And he starts off, he was very much like a party man, like in it with the Soviets. And obviously, life behind the wall, he starts to become disillusioned to that. And you learn so much about what life was like behind the Berlin Wall through his chapters, literally from the day it goes up, and it like eventually converges because Louisa's timeline takes place in like the weeks, days, minutes leading up to when the wall came down. Also, like I knew it came down in the 80s, but I was really just thinking a lot about how recent that was. And I was on the phone with my dad and I was like, do you remember where you were when the Berlin Wall came down? And he was like, obviously, like he was in college and he was a poli-sci major. And he was like, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall or whatever it was that Reagan said. But I was like, that must have been so wild to see. And like, my parents were in college when that happened. Like, it was not that long ago. But I feel like you might think I just said so much about that book, but I really just scratched the surface. I enjoyed it so much. I gave it 4 stars. I highly, highly recommend. Just so, so good. That is The Berlin Letters by Catherine Ray. Next, I read Cultish by Amanda Montell. I know so many of you have probably already read this. It's a cult favorite, if you will. I last month went to an event at Threads for the celebration of her latest book, The Age of Magical Overthinking. And I was like, let me read Cultish first. At the time I read this, I don't know if it still is, but it was free on Kindle Unlimited. So I downloaded it. And it's basically it's a book about like the language of cults. And she like goes through different cults. I realized that, like, I know a lot about cults when I was reading this because I was like, "Oh, yeah, like, I know this, I know this, I know this." So, still really good. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't, like, groundbreaking information to me. I gave that 3 stars. Next, I read Done and Dusted by Lila Sage. I gave this 5 stars, and, I forgot I had 2 5-star reads this month. That's crazy. Um, I talked about this on a full episode, and you should go listen to that. I will not go through it again, but this is a cowboy romance. Obsessed. Obsessed. 5 stars. Next, I read The Lost Book of Bond by Brianna Lapskis, and I was a huge fan of her last book, and now I can't remember the name of it. So I was very, very excited for this one to come out, and her last book was Library and Burn Books. And this one though, I love just as much. So this is a World War II historical fiction that takes place like pre, during, and post war, which I really like getting all those different perspectives. So the book opens up in the post war years. It's 1946, and our main girl is Emmy, and she works at the Library of Congress, and her husband was killed in action, I think, at Normandy. So she was given an opportunity to travel to Germany where like the Nuremberg trials are happening, and she ends up in like this warehouse, and they're basically trying to return books that the Germans looted and like to their rightful owners if they're able to. And then in a lot of cases, so specifically the Jewish collections that were stolen, they try to find like the proper place for those books to be returned to, because as we know, when the Nazis were ruining the world, they were also like pillaging art and literature and everything for their own gain. So this Emmy ends up working with the Monuments Men, which there's a really great movie called The Monuments Men. It's a George Clooney movie, which kind of just like gives you a bit of more information. I highly recommend watching that if you're in historical fiction. But they were these guys who were like, they weren't like really soldiers, I guess. Like they were, a lot of times they were like too old to have been actually fighting in the war, but they toured through Europe and were trying to rescue or prevent the theft of all of these like priceless works of art. And then after the war, they helped out with what Emmy is doing here. So on her first day at the library, it's not a library, I guess, but I guess it is, but it's like a warehouse. She finds this poetry collection, and inside she sees that someone wrote, "To Annalise, my brave Edelweiss pirate." And Emmy is so intrigued by that, and she decides to then go on the hunt for the rightful owner of this book. This is when we get some different timelines at play. So we meet Annalise, who is the Edelweiss pirate, and her timeline is in like the not early 30s, in the 30s. So it's before the war, but it's when like the Nazis are elected into power during her timeline. And she is an Edelweiss pirate, which is this real group. I never had heard about them in all the World War II historical fiction that I have read. And they basically, or at least her unit, was this group of teenagers who were protesting the Nazis coming into power. And in the beginning, it was probably always dangerous, but you see the danger start to mount as Hitler is elected and they are in power, and Kristallnacht happens and all of these horrible, horrific things that we know that the Nazis did. And so she is like very much a resistant to the Nazis coming into power. She's German. And at the same time, though, she has a younger sister whose name I obviously don't remember, but her sister is kind of like swept up in the Nazi propaganda machine. She goes to, and her sister is younger, and there is like, I forgot what it's called. It was something with a B, BDF maybe, the like girl equivalent to the Hitler Youth. And like the sister goes to that, and she is like fully in it. And Annalise like can't stand that, and she feels like her sister's always like following her and trying to like get her in trouble with like the law. But then our third timeline is that sister during the war, and we meet her. You don't know why she finally came to her senses about the Nazis, but you know that she is like working as an agent for the Americans, and that she is now actively trying to resist the Nazis while living under their regime during the war. So there is so much happening here. The story of Annalise and her sister is really kind of the bulk of it, but Emmy's timeline after the war, trying to find Annalise and find out what happened to her, was really fun to read as well. And the post-war years I think are really interesting, especially this is 46. So like the immediate aftermath of like what was going on there. found it to be really interesting, and like to have all three timelines in one book. I really enjoyed this. I'm a huge fan of this author. That is The Lost Book of Bond by Brianna Lapskis. I gave that 4 stars. Next, I read The Hidden Life of Aster Kelly by Catherine Sherbrooke. This was fine. I gave it 3 stars. There's 2 timelines. One, we're in the 40s, I believe, and the other is the 70s. And in the 40s, we meet Aster Kelly, who is kind of like she's an aspiring fashion designer who goes to Hollywood, where she like won a design competition and she gets to meet with these big designers. And she gets to the meeting in Hollywood and he's like, I'm looking for a model who can be Lauren Bacall's body double, because he's been contracted by the studios, which I actually read about this. I'm going to talk about a book I read about Coco Chanel, and she did this for one of the studios. But back in the day, the big studios would hire fashion designers to design for the actors and actresses in the movies. So like the costumes, but then also for their like going out on the town look. So their whole wardrobe in work and in their real life would be from one designer. And so Aster goes to talk to this designer about her collection, and he's like, she's stunning, obviously. And he's like, I need you to be a double for Lauren Bacall. She does it. She starts dating a studio exec, and that's her timeline in the 40s. People comparing this to Evelyn Hugo, like, we have to stop making comparisons just because a book takes place in the same time period. This is literally nothing like Evelyn Hugo except for like old Hollywood. And I really enjoyed the old Hollywood stuff. It actually reminded me of the Ryan Murphy show Hollywood, which I was a huge fan of. Then in the 70s, we meet Aster's daughter, who is trying to make it on Broadway, and secrets from Aster's past start arising with the daughter. I loved Aster's timeline. If the whole book was that, I probably would have given this 4 stars. I did not like the daughter. I thought she was extreme. Like, you can be unlikable, but she was kind of insufferable. And I don't know. I just thought like her stuff was a bit boring. So rounded that out to a 3-star read. Next, I read Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I gave this 2 stars. I know people listening are like, what is wrong with you? I don't think I like Abby Jimenez. And I am going to torture myself and read that new one, like it happened, whatever that new summer one is, because I only read Yours Truly so I could read that one, because I thought they were all connected. So last year I read Part of Your World. I liked it for a little bit and then just lost me. And I was like, not for me. And I was like, maybe this author just isn't for me, but I'll give authors like another shot, you know? So then it takes a lot for me to like fully quit an author. And if I don't like the third book, I'm going to quit. But then the new book came out this year. What is it called? I have it right here. Just for the Summer. And it's been everywhere. Everyone's raving about it. And I felt left out. So I was like, okay, I'm going to read that. But I was like, wait, I have Yours Truly, which they say is like the second in the Part of Your World series. And then Just for the Summer is the third. So I was like, let me just read this book. And I was really into it at first. Like, this is the closest I've ever read to like a Grey's Anatomy vibe book. Like, it's a hospital romance. There's like medical side plots going on. I was into it. Her books are too long. That's what it comes down to. Like, I got so bored in the middle, which was a shame because I really liked it in the beginning. And then by the end, I was like, this just needs to be done. And then I just gave it 2 stars. Like, I was just like, I can't. Like, I don't know. I don't really know how to explain it further. It just didn't click. It didn't work for me. And I still am going to read Just for the Summer because I only tortured myself with this book because I wanted to read that one. And if I don't like that one, then I'm done with Abby Jimenez and we're moving on. Next, I read Jane Seymour, The Haunted Queen by Alison Ware. This is part of my read of the Six Tudor Queens series. So Jane Seymour was Henry VIII's third wife, the only one to actually give him the son, Edward, who was king for like a hot second before he died very young. Jane Seymour has always been my least favorite because she's kind of just boring. Like, when you're comparing her to an Anne Boleyn or like, I love Anne Cleves. Like, I love her. She won really out of all the wives. Or like a Catherine Parr, the first woman to be published in England, or even Catherine of Aragon had like such a wild life. Like, Jane just like does not. And like Catherine Howard, obviously tragedy. Jane just like is boring. I think she's boring. And I think her song on Six is boring. And I always skip it when I'm listening to the Six soundtrack. But I realized when reading this book, because I really enjoyed it, I gave this book 4 stars. And I realized that she's probably still boring compared to the rest, but every time I've ever seen her in media, whether it be the show The Tudors or other books I've read about the Tudors, she's never been the sole focus of that piece of media until I read this book. And I think I take the blame for like not seeking things out solely about Jane and like her main character moment. She really like I really liked her in this book. I really liked her loyalty and her sense of duty. So she was a lady in waiting to Catherine of Aragon, which was the first wife, and then she stayed loyal to Catherine for so long until she was pretty much forced to be for Anne Boleyn. And I just like I really liked her, and I didn't actually realize how tragic her death was. I thought she just died in childbirth, which is tragic, period. But it was a little bit more than that. Then I was like doing a lot of like medical research about how she died. But I really like this, and I was like very happily surprised, and that's why I like to read books like this when I already know so much about the Tudors, because it's just like a new perspective and a new way of seeing a person. And sorry to the ghost of Jane Seymour for not liking you until now. Next, I read The Goddess of Warsaw by Lisa Barr. I loved this. I could not put this down. So, our main girl is, I forgot. So, I'm clicking. Also, so, when I do these wrap up episodes, I literally just have my Goodreads up. So, it's all listed there: name, author, my rating. Okay, so our main girl is Lena, but she originally okay, so the book opens up and Lena Browning is this kind of like super famous Hollywood actress. She was like a golden age actress and she's still alive. And this young up and coming actress like is asking if she can produce and direct the movie of Lena's life. And Lena's kind of like, you have no idea what you're getting into. And she starts to tell her life story. So then we meet her as she was born. Her name was Bina Blonsky, and she was she's Polish, and she's from a wealthy family, a wealthy Jewish family, which is important for this story. And she is an actress, obviously, and they're just like very prominent until the Nazis invade and take over Poland, and she is imprisoned in the Warsaw Ghetto with the rest of the Jewish population. So because of how she looks like she is Aryan, so she's able to like slip through, like, as people will kind of like tunnel in and out of the ghetto and like pass as an Aryan woman out of the ghetto. And because she's able to, she gets involved with the resistance rings in the ghetto, and she's like getting them supplies and things like that. And this is all kind of leading up to the Warsaw Uprising, which I found really, really interesting. And I enjoyed reading about this. Obviously, it is like extremely sad and tragic things happen. But I loved Bina/Lena's strength and bravery. Like, she could have just gone out into the world and hid the fact that she was Jewish until the war ended, but she didn't. She kept going back to fight with her people and her friends and her family, and I just thought it was really admirable and scary, and she was just so brave. So that there's all of that going on, which is just so interesting. But then there's also a second part of the book that happens after the war, which I'm not going to say anything because it's like a giant spoiler. But when I saw we were going to part 2 in the 50s, I was like, oh God, like what are we going to do now after reading this wild, thrilling, scary, upsetting story? I was like, what are we going to do now? I really liked where the author went with this. It could have all gone downhill, but it made so much sense. I thought it tied the whole story and who Lena was together perfectly. And I know I'm being so vague, but I really enjoyed this. Like, I could not put this down. I gave it 4 stars. That is The Goddess of Warsaw by Lisa Barr. Next, I read The Romanov Empress by C.W. Gortner. You guys might remember when I read, what was it called? The Vatican Princess, about Lucrezia Borgia. That was my first by this author, and I really loved it. So I actually already had this one on my shelf, and I've been on my Romanov journey. So this is about Serena Maria Fedorovna. Obviously, I can't pronounce anything Russian. It is so hard for me when I'm getting a little bit better. The Russian names are just like, I just get so confused because there's also so many of them with the same name. And I know it was like that for me when I first started getting into the British royals, and I'm already starting to form a better like mental like family tree of the Romanovs in my head. And I feel like, especially after reading this book, I now have a really good grasp on the end of the Romanov dynasty, like of Tsar Nicholas II, his wife, Aleki, who was Queen Victoria's granddaughter and was one of the Hesse girls. There's a great book that I just read, The Romanov Sisters, that you learn a lot about their younger lives. And then this is about the mother of Tsar Nicholas II. So she has appeared in books I've been reading about, like Nicholas and Aleki. This one was solely about her, which I really enjoyed that. So we meet Maria as a princess of Denmark who is supposed to marry. So she's supposed to marry the Tsarevich. I think that's what they call like the heir to the Tsar. But he dies. So then she marries his brother. Like, not really scandalous back then, but like would be scandalous now. And so they're the parents of Tsar Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, who the infamous Anastasia, his dad. So this is about Anastasia's grandma. So hopefully help you guys place that. So we meet her literally as a child in Denmark, and her dad is about to become king. Like, he's inheriting the throne from his uncle. And it was really interesting because they were kind of like poverty, not by like poor people standards, but just like not the opulence you would expect for her dad being heir to the throne. But you see them raised up. Her sister marries Queen Victoria's son, Bertie. So there's just like, you start seeing all of the connections going on there, like how Queen Victoria's kids and grandkids just like married everyone in Europe. But I really enjoyed learning about her early life, her early years in Russia, and then as she's raising Nicholas II, and she's very progressive in her politics. I don't want to like spoil too much, I guess, but like her father-in-law was going to introduce like the Doma, which eventually like Nicholas II had to do, but he wanted to bring in like a constitutional part to their monarchy because the Russian monarchy was like an absolute monarchy, and her husband was against that, and like she like played a big role in that. But then when I would say like the first half, she's young. I don't know what I'm trying to freaking say. But anyway, my favorite part of this actually though was the last part of the book, which is when her son Nicholas is the Tsar, and Rasputin comes into play, and all these things leading up to the Russian Revolution. And then the book goes on to her death. So there is like after the revolution and everything that come to pass, so you get to see her perspective through that. I love this part because she was saying things that I'm always thinking when I'm learning about what happened in the Russian Revolution, like with Rasputin and them Nicholas just like not making great choices. So I really loved her. And I was just kept thinking like how different the world could potentially be today if her son listened to her. That was like not my best work, but 4 stars. I really loved it. I learned so much. Next, I read Fair Rosaline by Natasha Solomons. I gave this 2 stars. Honestly, I should have DNF'd this. I don't know why I didn't. I kept waiting for it to get better. I'm not a Shakespeare girl. Like, I've never have been, and I do blame my ninth grade English teacher for that, because when my first introduction to Shakespeare was Romeo and Juliet, and she didn't really like Shakespeare, and she just did not sell us on it, and she kind of like acted like it was a chore for us to be reading it, and so it always has been a chore to me. This is from the perspective of Juliet's cousin Rosaline, who fell in love with Romeo first. There's a bit of like a feminist edge to it. I think if you like Shakespeare, you would like this. It just didn't work for me. Next, I read Swift and Saddled by Lila Sage. This is the follow-up to Done and Dusted. I gave this 4 stars. I really loved it. I just liked the first couple more. And like the first book had like more tropes that I'm into, but I literally flew through this. There's like magic in her writing. You cannot stop reading them. And it was so good. Next, I read We Love the Nightlife. Oh my God. I had 3 5-star reads this month. How did I forget that? Wow. So I read We Love the Nightlife by Rachel Collar Croft, and this is the vampire book I have been waiting my whole life for. I always am like, there are no good vampire books. I know Twilight, but like that was it, really. That was it for me. And this is the one I have been waiting for, and I'm going to not say anything else because it is going to get its own moment soon, where you'll hear me go on about it for so long. But this comes out on August 20th, and you all need to add it to your list. Next, I read A Short Walk Through a Wide World by Douglas Westerbeck. So what happened was, this was a book of the month pick, and I was like, okay, maybe like it sounded interesting. They were comparing it to Addie LaRue, which, like, once again, let's stop making comparisons where they don't need to be. And I was intrigued, and I posted on my story when I started reading, and I was like, I am so into this. I love at the beginning of the book. The middle completely lost me, but then I loved the end. So I think I rounded this out to a 3-star read. So our main girl, I don't remember her name off the top of my head, and now my internet's not loading, so we're never gonna know. But here we go. Aubrey. So it's 1885, and her name is Aubrey, and she, as like a child, she's like 9 years old, when all of a sudden one night she starts like literally dying in her home. And when they move her, she's fine. So basically, what happens is she has this disease where if she stays in one place for too long, it ends up being like she can't stay anywhere for more than 4 days. She starts to die, and to survive, she has to move on. So she ends up traveling the whole world, every corner of the world. And there's a magical element to some of her travels that I'm not going to say. The thing for me was that it was cool because you're seeing all these different locations and things like that, and like the disease itself was very interesting. There was no plot. Like, we're basically just like following her through her life, which is fine because it was interesting, but it just started to get really repetitive and boring until the way that it ended, and it made me like tear up. So that's all I'll say on that. I gave that 3 stars. Next up is my historical audiobook for the month, which was Mademoiselle Coco Chanel and the Pulse of History by Rhonda Garlick. I gave this 4 stars. I read this. I said on my Instagram it was my senior year, but actually it was my junior year spring break of college. And I remember because I was reading this on the beach when my sister found out she got into FIT, which is where I went to college. So then we realized we would have a year together at the same school. This is a biography of Coco Chanel, and I liked it when I was reading it on spring break in college, which just says everything you need to know about me. I loved it this time around. And it was funny to me just how like lifelong learning and all of this that I do with my historical fiction pays off, because so much of what I read, I knew a lot of the history. And then also I was able to like connect the dots of history to things I already knew. So like Coco had a love affair with a Russian Grand Duke Dmitri. And like he popped up in the book I was reading about the Romanovs. Like things like that would have just gone over my head when I was like 19 reading this book. But I really love this because Coco Chanel has such an interesting life story, and she's such a problematic character in history, but she also played a role in so much history. And just because of the times that she was alive, was like a part of so much history, let alone making history herself. So this really is, like it says, it's called Coco Chanel and the Pulse of History. So it's a biography of her, but also like a biography of what was happening at the time and how she played a role in it and how the history happening affected her. And I just found it to be really, really interesting. It was great on audio. I highly recommend for anybody interested in Coco, and also like the greater historical view of Chanel. Next, I read Ambition by Kate Bryan, which is number 7 in my private reread. I love rereading the series. I'm loving it way more than I thought I would. Next, I read Hang the Moon by Jeanette Walls, and I know you're going to ask me. I have not read The Glass Castle, but I have seen the movie. I got this book when it came out, and I just obviously didn't pick it up until now, but then I was on my UK trip like right after it came out, and I kept seeing it in bookstores, and I was so drawn to it, but I was like, no, you have it at home, you have it at home, you have it at home. I finally read it. I always am looking for books with Peaky Blinders vibes, and this one is probably the closest that I've come. So this is it's super character driven, but it's also the story of a family. So our main girl is Sally Kincaid, and the Kincaid family rules this small town in rural Virginia, and she's born in like 1901. And on the back of the book, it says her dad, who's known as the Duke, is the big man in this small town. And he literally runs this town. Everyone calls him the Duke, which was funny to me because me and my siblings call one of my uncles Duke he just like told us one day when I was like 7, you guys have to call me Duke now. And then we did to this day. And like none of my other cousins call him Duke. Like it's just us. It's like a special like inside joke we have. But so it was just like funny to me that he was just they called him Duke. That was very near and dear to my heart. But this Duke is different than my Duke. And this Duke is like not a great guy. And he runs this town. Actually, like so the opposite, because my Duke is like very high up in the police department where I'm from, and this guy is a literal criminal. So this is at the time though of like prohibition. So just get the vibe. But Sally's mom dies when she is a baby, and then the Duke remarries, and the stepmom hates her, as it always goes in these stories. So she like expels Sally from the house as a 9-year-old, and she goes to live with an aunt from her mom's side of the family. But she idolized her dad, and she always wanted to come back. And when the stepmom dies, she's 17 and she's introduced back to the family, and we see her try to fall back under her dad's good graces, but she also wants a part of the family business, and she wants to be involved in it. And we see her do that and kind of take a place in this man's world. And he says, I'll treat you like everybody else. And prohibition's happening, rum running, the government's there trying to get the bootleggers and all of that stuff happening. So all of that was really interesting. But also this is about like Sally finding herself, and about family relationships and found family and finding your place in those things and in the world and coming into your own. And she was so strong and resilient, and I really loved it. I gave it 4 stars. I could not put it down. And there's passages that are just so beautifully written. The final book is one I'm still reading because I'm recording this on May 31st, so it will count, but it is Tsarina by Ellen Alpstead. So continuing my Romanov journey, but this time we're in the 1700s, and I'm halfway through this book, and I thought it was about Catherine the Great. It's not. It's about Catherine the First. So when I told you I'm learning, but this is it's so good, and it is so wild. And last night I was like, this is such Game of Thrones vibes. And I was like, wait a second. I said that when I read about Lucrezia Borgia too. And then I was like, wait a second. George R.R. Martin is not as like clever as we give him the credit, because he was pulling, I'm sure, so much inspiration from history and what these real life women went through. And we gave him all this credit for being creative. And it's like, no, like we should start comparing Game of Thrones to history instead of comparing history to Game of Thrones. But I'm really enjoying it. It is wild. It's pretty long, and since it's new to me history, I'm reading at a slower for me pace because I'm trying to absorb it and take it all in. But I'm really enjoying it, and I'm halfway through, and I know it's going to be a 4-star read. So that is Tsarina by Ellen Alpstead. And then I already had on my shelf the second book, which is about her daughter. So I'm sure I'll be reading that soon too. That is our May wrap up. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure you're following, subscribe, but always get to on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. Follow me on Instagram at Kayla What. Follow the show at Professional Book Girl. Leave a rating and review. It'd make me very happy. If you're inspired by any of the books I spoke about on today's episode, please do so through mybookshops.org, link in the show notes and in my bio on Instagram. I will see you on Thursday with my interview with Brooklyn Foster.